Hey squad, it's Brandon from the Bantu Sun. Thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to hop in the news, and there's so much news to hop into, but let's hop into the news about what I would consider, or what's been purported to be, the reconciliation of the Shia Sunni split. So, for those that don't know, one of the major chasms that's been purported to be the reason behind a lot of the conflict or some of the conflict in the Middle East is the Sunni Shiite split. And this is all based on the foundings of Islam and the ownership of leadership within Islam. And the head of the Sunni side is usually referenced as Saudi Arabia, while the head of the Shia side is usually referenced as Iran. Now, a lot of people think this really blew up around 2016. This is where Saudi Arabia had, in one of their mass executions, they executed a scholar Nimir al-Nimir. And this execution of the Shiite scholar really set Iran into a blaze, and Iranian citizens stormed the Saudi diplomatic missions. The Saudis, in retaliations, they basically closed their embassy. They kicked out diplomats in Riyadh, and it's really been a contentious relationship because if you look at a lot of the proxy battles or proxy wars that are blowing up in the Middle East, it's usually two sides to these things, and you have uh, Iran backing a side, and then Saudi Arabia, and they're usually accompanied by Egypt and UAE to some degree. So Iran is a lot more. The way they do things is a lot more different. So Iran is going to be like a military support, logistics support, supply support, where the as far as the Arab side of things, with Saudi Arabia and UAE, they're usually the financiers, they're usually the money backers, and usually the muscle is going to be Egypt. But Egypt is used sparingly, but mostly it's going to be Saudi and Emirati money behind the other side of the movement against the Shia side. Well, a lot of this started to change earlier this year in March, where representatives from Saudi Arabia, Iran, and China were seen shaking hands. China was mediating, and it seems as though Saudi Arabia and Iran were reconciling. And I said, okay, let's see how real this is. And the only way to see how real it is to see what impact it produces. So the hot zones right now will be Yemen. Between these two will be Yemen, Syria, possibly Lebanon. So the reason why it's possibly Lebanon is because Hezbollah, who's on the Iranian side, so to speak, or has Iranian support, they're pretty much in a very strong position in Lebanon, a very strong position. They're well integrated. And you notice this with a lot of Islamic groups. Same thing with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. They're very well integrated in the community. They provide services. They have hearts and minds, and that's what Hezbollah has in Lebanon. They're very strongly integrated into the community. But the in Yemen, right next to Saudi Arabia, that's a hot war. You have Saudi Arabia, who's souped up, usually using Western weapons, and they're trying to combat with the Houthis, the Shiite-backed Houthis in Yemen, which is their neighbor, and then same thing in Syria. There is, if you look, it's called the Shiite Arc. So if you look at a map, you'll see that from Iran to the Mediterranean is this Shiite arc, and it's going to include parts of Iraq, which is majority Shiite. It's going to include parts of Syria as well as Lebanon. And this pathway is from Iran to the Mediterranean. And historically, a lot of this, when you look at some of the old empires of old, will be considered part of the Greater Persian Empire. So the Persian Empire really reached the Mediterranean, but this sphere of influence has Persian footprints, Persian fingerprints all on it. So I watched the news to see, okay, what comes about this handshake? Because to me, initially, I assumed this was symbolic, but it is not. Uh, Saudi Arabia has turned on a dime and made drastic changes. They've released prisoners in Yemen. they went as far as to reintroduce or propose the option to reintroduce President Bashar al-Assad from Syria back into the Arab League, which even their fellow Arab League members are like, wait, hold on, guys. So this reconciliation is very sincere, and up to now, I think it really puts the Middle East on its head. It's the way the Middle East is structured is that the Saudi Arabia is the centerpiece of OPEC on the Persian Gulf, and its relationship is primarily with the West. And this has been this way since the House of Saud has ran Saudi Arabia. And it begs to offer or conjure up three questions to me. First question is, what does Israel do? So Israel is a major player on the stage. They're very aggressive. And if you know anything about Israel, they are feisty. They're small and tough. They're pit bulls. So just because they have a more diminutive size state means little, because they're basically armed to the teeth with their relationship with the U.S. They don't have a lot of strong allies, but they got the allies that count. And they've been a lot of that muscle for the U.S. and the Middle East to keep things moving along. So you've seen Israel send out commandos to do raids as far as Latin America, Uganda and Entebbe. They've had multiple Arab-Israeli wars in their foundings, and they're usually it's constantly dealing with the Palestinians at home, as well as managing those relationships, especially with the strong Hezbollah next door in Lebanon. So the Middle East kind of been scattered. Some of that's going to be, a lot of that is going to be due to the wars in Iraq, overthrowing the strongman President Saddam Hussein. The war in Syria pretty much holding down or very much limiting the abilities of Syria, because they're trying to keep their country as whole. So a lot of these things have been blowing up around Israel. Israel's kind of been like this oasis of peace. And with these two sides reconciling, it's going to remove some of that energy in the room. And I think some of that energy is going to be diverted back to a reconciliation or a sustainable agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. So if you have those, up to now, what these countries have been looking at each other, now they might start looking at the Israel-Palestinian situation and maybe thinking, this Palestinian status quo is no longer acceptable. Israel's been actually recouping a lot of the Saudi side to the team. So they've been reconciling their relationships in recent years, which are Bahrain's, which are Saudi Arabia's, working in these relationships, trying to make themselves a better partner and a more palatable partner in the Middle East. So that's one question that's going to come up. How is Israel going to look at this new reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia if it continues on this course? Secondly, I'm going to look at the United States. How is the United States looking at this reconciliation? So you have China that comes in to mediate this, and Saudi Arabia has been really click tight. I've always seen the House of Saud as almost synonymous with the West. This goes back to the inheritance America got after World War II of Saudi Arabia relationships from the British. Before it was the Americans, it was the British. And Saudi Arabia, in my opinion, basically was I don't want to say Saudi Arabia in itself, but as a source of energy, it has been one of the linchpins, and I think, in the Western Alliance. And what do I mean by that? Energy security is a major concern in Europe. When I made my jigsaw puzzles, my geopolitical puzzles, which has the resources, I focus on exports. And one of the reasons I focus on exports, because I just thought it'd be a great way to see what is produced where and how do people source that product. But if I was to flip my maps to imports, you will see all across Europe oil imports, right? This is a relatively energy poor continent. So very strong in industries, basic materials such as coal, but we got some wind farms, some hydro farms in the north where you have dealing with the hydropower of Scandinavia. But for the most part, nobody makes oil in Europe except you can say Eastern Europe, which is not the biggest producers. You have some in Romania. Russia's a no-go, right? That's one of the big reasons, the total shutdown of energy, and that's why they were sourcing a lot of gas from Russia. But it's really not known for producing that energy. So America says, look, guys, trust me, I'll keep the lanes open. I'll keep that Suez Canal open. So they're going to be great, strong partners with Egypt. And I'll keep the source of the oil open. And that's going to be Saudi Arabia. So with Saudi Arabia suddenly calming down with the Iran situation and detensifying that situation, America's looking at Saudi Arabia probably saying, Saudi Arabia's on our hit list. We're not really good friends with Saudi Arabia. America's always trying to crank up the sanctions on Saudi Arabia. So it's going to be interesting to see what Saudi Arabia moves, how that's going to be viewed in Washington, D.C. Is it going to be some type of betrayal? Is Joe Biden going to be seen as a president that lost Saudi Arabia? So I think that relationship is going to be very interesting as it evolves. Lastly, I wanted to say, what did the Chinese offer the Saudis for them to take such drastic change in their mindset? Because this is, to me, what I've seen is Saudi concessions. And these are not like concessions. They're releasing prisoners in Yemen. These are going to be foot soldiers. So they're literally releasing the fighters back in the fight on the other side. They're bringing back reconciling relationships in Yemen. So what they are releasing prisoners in Yemen, they're going to be foot soldiers, and that's going to be on the other side of Saudi Arabia. You got the situation in Syria with President Bashar al-Assad just walking them back in. But this is a strong Shia alliance. So one, it says maybe the Shia-Sunni split wasn't the real source of contention in the Middle East, because the Saudi Arabians seem to have really stepped back from this conflict in some way. But the only real tangible exchange I've seen thus far is Huawei, the Chinese telecommunications company, proposing to move their headquarters to Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. But that is not enough. Like, to me, looking at history, looking at geopolitics, moving a commercial capital. I know that the current crown prince, MBS in Saudi Arabia, is really energetic about making Saudi Arabia a hub in the Middle East, a commercial hub in the Middle East beyond oil and energy. But what did the Chinese promise them? I just don't think moving your telecommunications headquarters is enough. And I don't want to fearmonger, but I'll put it this way. A lot of work the United States has done in the Middle East has been around limiting or controlling nuclear proliferation. And the saying is, or the belief is, that if one of these countries, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, get a nuclear weapon, we can maybe even throw Turkey in there. But if Saudi Arabia, Egypt, or Iran, UAE, one of these countries get a nuclear weapon, the region gets a nuclear weapon. Because it's basically going to step the game up. So a lot of the work the U.S. has been doing has been trying to limit Iran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon. Because if Iran has a nuclear weapon, everybody thinks that they're going to be able to have a nuclear weapon. And they got the funds to do so, especially in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. So I'm going to continue to watch, but I'm really curious to see how did China get such complicity and buy-in, I should say. How did China get such buy-in from Saudi Arabia on a dime? So we're going to watch this, see how it evolves, and I can be 100% wrong, but it's definitely changing. And a peaceful reconciliation or a direction to that, more people living neighborly in a more friendly manner, that's always a good thing. So Let us know your thoughts. Please like, share, subscribe if you're enjoying the comment. Till next time, take care. Bantu up.